Hi, everyone. Today is our third and final message in the Go sermon series. If you missed either of the first two, you can catch up on our YouTube page at the link that's on the screen. To recap some of the things that we considered, in the call of the prophet Isaiah, we saw that an authentic encounter with God puts us in touch with our deepest needs and with the deepest needs of others. We saw that God meets us where we are and uses us to meet others where they are. In Jesus' call to the church in the book of Acts, chapter 1, we saw that to be saved by Christ is to be sent by Christ. And Christ calls us beyond the comfortable and the familiar to the uncomfortable and the unfamiliar, one step at a time. Today, we want to consider how we can respond to God's call when the need is overwhelming. And so for that, we're going to turn to an ancient story about one of the most well-known characters in the biblical story. Moses said to God, "If I come to the Israelites and say to them, 'The God of your ancestors has sent me to you,' and they ask me, 'What is his name?' what shall I say to them?" God said to Moses, "I am who I am." He said further, "Thus you shall say to the Israelites, 'I am has sent me to you.'" Then Moses answered, "But suppose they do not believe me or listen to me, but say, 'The Lord did not appear to you.'" The Lord said to him, "What is that in your hand?" He said, "A staff." And he said, "Throw it on the ground." So he threw the staff on the ground, and it became a snake, and Moses drew back from it. And then the Lord said to Moses, "Reach out your hand and seize it by the tail." So he reached out his hand and grasped it, and it became a staff in his hand, so that they may believe that the Lord, the God of their ancestors, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has appeared to you. I have to admit, it's difficult to take a few verses out of such a massive story as Moses' story and try to make sense of them in a way that's faithful to the whole and also useful to a listener. If you haven't read the book of Exodus, you'll want to take time to read it. There are important roots there for the Jesus story that we read in the Gospels and the rest of the New Testament. I need to summarize just a bit. This passage comes from Moses' first conversation with God, when God was laying out mission instructions for Moses. The conversation came after a long season of what we might call personal development for Moses. You probably remember the setting for this talk between Moses and God. It's the one where Moses heard God speaking from a shrub that's on fire but isn't destroyed. The people of Israel, children of Abraham, were captive slaves in Egypt. They were suffering. They were living much, much less than their God-promised life. And God told Moses, "I see their misery, and the time for their deliverance has come." And then God spoke the words that had to strike fear in Moses' heart. "I'm going to send you to lead them out, Moses." It's obvious that Moses experienced a profound lack of confidence. Almost everything Moses says for the rest of the conversation begins with the word "but." But Moses said, but Moses said, then Moses said, but Lord, but Moses said. We can't fairly criticize Moses, because whenever God asks something of me or you, we generally answer the same way. Love your enemies and pray for them. But Lord, do not judge. But Lord, listen more than you speak. But Lord, be generous with money. But Lord, you get my point. Moses' reaction was understandable. The Egyptian Pharaoh was a powerful ruler with a significant police force. He wasn't going to let his productive and inexpensive labor force just walk away. And Moses was worried that the people wouldn't believe him or listen to him. But before Moses even got to those concerns, he asked a critically important question. Who am I? And God answered, I will be with you. From Moses' perspective, the mission that God wanted to send him on seemed impossible. He felt entirely inadequate. But God promised that Moses would not go alone. The conversation continued as God laid out the particulars, and Moses kept trying to ask the question, "But Lord, what if the people don't listen to me?" Back and forth they went. Direction, objection, until the Lord asked a question for Moses. "What is that in your hand?" And Moses said, "A staff." It was a shepherd's staff. Moses had spent the last several years watching sheep for his father-in-law Jethro. It was the tool of his trade. He had held it in his hands virtually every day for 40 years. He was exquisitely familiar with how to handle a shepherd's staff. So the Lord told Moses to take this staff, this tool that he knew very well, and throw it on the ground. In a scene that I'd rather not imagine, the staff became a snake. Naturally, Moses jumped. I'm sure that if I had been in Moses' shoes, I would have spoken an impolite word. The story got even more unsettling when God said, "All right, Moses, pick it up." Yeah, right. Moses was a stronger man than I am because he reached out and picked up the snake, and it became a staff again. The Lord was giving Moses evidence that he wasn't going on mission alone. As the conversation continued, Moses resorted to lying to get out of the job. And God called his bluff and got angry. And so Moses set out on his assignment. God told him to take the staff with him because it was going to be a sign of God's presence and power. The staff was no longer just a shepherd's tool. The text describes it as the staff of God. What can we learn from this strange, wonderful, powerful story? Well, first, what you have is what you need. What you have is what you need. The Lord doesn't call you to use something that you don't have. The Lord calls you with what you have in your hand. If you have a hammer in your hand, God will use you and your hammer. If you have a stethoscope in your hand, God will use you and your stethoscope. If you have a camera in your hand, God will use you and your camera. If you have cooking equipment in your hand, God will use you and your cooking equipment. If you have a guitar in your hand, God will use you and your guitar. If you have the gift of influence, God will use you and your voice. If you have the gift to teach, God will use you and the gift of instruction. If you have money to give, God will use you and your money. God is the giver of every good and perfect gift, and God is the user of every good and perfect gift. When God sends you on an impossible mission, God will use what is already in your hand. Now, one of the ways that we Christians get things sideways sometimes is when we are so confident in our gift that we dismiss or despise someone else's gift. That was one of the things that got the Christians at Corinth in hot water with Paul. Each of them seemed to feel that their particular gift was the best, most important, most desirable gift, and all of the other gifts were somehow less than. But now I'm starting to meddle, so I'll get back to Moses. When God sends you on a mission, what you have is what you need. And second, it's not who you are, it's who is with you. It's not who you are, it's who is with you. Pastor John Ortberg shared a story from his own life about meeting a young kid while surfing one day. He wrote, "A few weeks ago when I was out surfing, there was no one else in the water. In fact, there was no one around at all except a guy the size of Goliath doing taekwondo on the beach. After I'd been out a little while, a tiny wisp of a kid came paddling up out of nowhere. I couldn't believe he was out there by himself. He pulled his little board right up next to mine. He was so small, he hardly needed a board. He could have stood up in the ocean on a frisbee. Anyway, he started chatting with me like we were old friends. He told me his name was Shane. He asked me how long I'd been surfing. I asked him how long he'd been surfing. 7 years, he said. How old are you? I asked. 8. He asked me about my kids and my family. Then he said, what I like about surfing is that it's so peaceful. You meet a lot of nice people here. You're a nice guy, Shane, I said. That's why you meet nice people. We talked a while longer. Then I asked him, how did you get here, Shane? My dad brought me, he said. Then he turned around and waved at the nearly empty beach. The Goliath doing martial arts waved back. Hi, son, he called out. And then I knew why Shane was so at home in the ocean. It wasn't his size. It wasn't his skill. It was who was sitting on the beach. His father was always watching, and his father was very big. Shane wasn't really alone at all. It's not who you are. It's who is with you. On February 24th, 1791, John Wesley sent a final letter from his deathbed. He had been a vocal opponent against slavery, calling it the execrable sum of all villainies. As usual, Wesley left no doubt where he stood. His letter was addressed to William Wilberforce, a member of Parliament. Wilberforce was a part of an unsuccessful attempt to pass abolition. And this is part of that letter. Unless the divine power has raised you up, I see not how you can go through your glorious enterprise in opposing that execrable villainy, which is the scandal of religion, of England, and of human nature. Unless God has raised you up for this very thing, you will be worn out by the opposition of men and devils. But if God be for you, who can be against you? Are all of them stronger than God? Oh, be not weary of well-doing. Go on in the name of God and in the power of his might, till even American slavery, the vilest that ever saw the sun, shall vanish away before it. Public debate continued for several years, and in 1807, the abolition of slavery came to pass throughout the British Empire. When God sends you on mission, what you have is what you need. And it's not who you are, it's who is with you.